am Jessica Dean, and welcome to our special coverage of the hush money trial of Donald Trump, streaming right here on CNN Max. Right now, the prosecution is wrapping up its closing arguments in a Manhattan courtroom. They've spent hours walking the jury through a timeline and paper trail, piece by piece. Their goal: to convince the jury once and for all that Trump intentionally tried to falsify check records in order to hide hush money payments to win the 2016 election. The defense finished earlier today arguing Trump had no knowledge of any efforts to do that. And attorney Todd Blanche slammed the prosecution's star witness Michael Cohen, telling the jury again and again how much he lied. At one point, Blanche called him, quote, the greatest liar of all time. Our legal experts are standing by to break down every argument for you. But first, let's start with CNN's Kara Scannell, who was inside the courtroom and has more from today.
This case is not about Michael Cohen. It's about Mr. Trump. The prosecution with the final word to the jury in the Trump hush money trial, the first criminal case ever brought against a former president. Cleaning up some of star witness Michael Cohen's testimony after Trump's defense repeatedly painted him as a liar and thief who the jury could not trust. The defendant chose Michael Cohen as his fixer because he was willing to lie and cheat on his behalf. Lead prosecutor Joshua Steinglass said, Mr. Trump chose Mr. Cohen for the same qualities that his attorneys now urge you to reject his testimony because of it. The Manhattan District Attorney accuses Trump of conspiring to undermine the 2016 election by illegally falsifying business records to conceal a payment Cohen made to porn star Stormy Daniels to keep her quiet about an alleged affair. Her story is messy. It makes people uncomfortable to hear, but that's kind of the point. That's what the defendant did not want the American people to see, Steinglass said, referring to Stormy Daniels. It turned out to be one of the most valuable contributions anyone ever made to the Trump campaign, Steinglass told the jury, while ticking through evidence of another catch-and-kill deal involving former Playboy model Karen McDougal, when Cohen recorded a conversation with Trump.
About how to set the whole thing up with funding. Yes.
Steinglass called the recording jaw-dropping and said of the catch-and-kill deals, this scheme cooked up by these men at this time could very well be what got President Trump elected.
This is a very dangerous day for America. It's a very sad day.
Trump's defense speaking first, something sources tell CNN the former president only recently realized and has been angry about.
Under the federal law, I did nothing wrong.
Trump attorney Todd Blanche reminding the jury that at one time Stormy Daniels denied the affair she now says she had with Trump.
So you signed and released a statement that said, I'm not denying this affair because I was paid in hush money. I'm denying it because it never happened. That's a lie.
Yes.
You know, I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them.
Blanche claiming Daniels took advantage of Trump while he was running for president after the infamous Access Hollywood tape. Miss Daniels seized an opportunity. Now's the time to strike, Blanche says she thought. After ticking through many of the characters in this case, trying to dent their credibility, Blanche became laser-focused on Michael Cohen. He lied to you repeatedly. He lied many, many times before you even met him, Blanche told the jury. Michael Cohen is the gloat, the greatest liar of all time. In a closing line that drew an objection from prosecutors and an admonishment from the judge, Blanche exclaimed, you cannot send someone to prison. You cannot convict somebody based upon the words of Michael Cohen. Kara Scannell, CNN, New York.
All right, Kara Scannell, thanks so much for that report. And let's discuss all of this with our legal panel. Criminal defense attorney Dante Mills, trial attorney Kelly Hyman, and former New York Assistant Attorney General Adam Pollack. Great to see all of you on what's been a pretty eventful day. Dante, let's start first with you. We previously discussed the defense's closing arguments and how much they would focus on Michael Cohen's trustworthy. Attorney Blanche really emphasizing Cohen's history of lying, calling him the MVP of liars. Do you think that that reputation was baked in, or did the defense actually cause some extra damage here at the end?
I think everybody already knew who Michael Cohen was before he came in and testified. Even jurors who really didn't follow this case as much as we do, right, as legal analysts who are really following this, people heard who Michael Cohen was, and there was no surprise what information was going to come out about him. I think the prosecution and the defense talked about his skeletons even in the opening statement, so I don't think there were any surprises throughout the trial that he lied one more time, right? I don't think that changed anything. I think what was important here is the last line of the defense's closing argument. You can't send somebody to jail. They weren't talking about just anybody. They're talking about a former president of the United States, and I think that's what they're staking their whole defense on. He's too important to be sent to jail for something as trivial as this. I think that's the closing they delivered. I think they have to acknowledge that this scheme happened, but they're trying to sell to this jury, and maybe not the entire jury, but one person on this jury, that you cannot send a former president to jail because nobody died here. This wasn't too big of a deal. Plus, you have liars. It's messy. Don't send a former president to jail over this. It was wrong for them to say that. I understand why they did. The judge recognized that and admonished them, but I think that's what they're staking their entire defense on here.
Kelly, I want to read you just part of what the attorney, Mr. Blanche, said. He said he has repeatedly lied under oath. He has lied to his family. He has lied to his wife about the $131,000 home equity line of credit. He lied to his banker. I mean, he's literally like an MVP of liars, and that's the attorney on Michael Cohen. What did you think, Kelly, of the defense's closing arguments?
It was throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping something sticks. That was their whole idea. Let me throw these different ideas out there. It was all over the place, but I think there was two key things that they focus on. One is, as you stated, about Michael Cohen. He's a liar, pants on fire. He's the MVP of lying. He's lied to the American people. He's lied to his family. He's gonna lie again. But we all knew that. We all knew that Michael Cohen has so much baggage. I mean, he has more baggage than they would sell at a super Walmart. He has so much baggage. But we knew that. And then the second thing was about reasonable doubt. And that was they're trying to say that there is reasonable doubt because the state has to prove their case beyond reasonable doubt, and they were trying to poke at holes that the jury wanted more evidence. Should have been more evidence to convict him.
And Adam, you thought the defense should not have continued to say that Trump did not have relations with Stormy Daniels, which he denies. Why do you say that?
I think it's a strategic blunder. The defense started in their opening statement, and they came back to it in closing, saying that Trump had not had an affair with her, that no payment of hush money had been made. But if there's one thing that was abundantly clear in this trial, it was the affair happened, the hush money happened. None of that is illegal. The defense could have got up there in closing and said, yes, there was an affair, yes, there was hush money, but how the records were accounted for? Trump was a busy guy. He was running a country. He was running a company. I don't know, maybe somebody in the accounting department, Weisselberg, somebody else. They could have owned up to the hush money, which is not a crime. I think doubling down on the idea that there was no affair and no hush money makes themselves a liar, and hard for them then to call Michael Cohen a liar when the jury is going to smell that they themselves, the defense lawyers, are lying.
If I can jump in and just follow up on that point.
Hang on one second, Kelly. I'll get to you 1 second. Go ahead, Dante.
Yeah, just following up on that point that Adam makes, which is phenomenal. There's this thing called credibility, right? Not only with the defendant, but with his attorneys. And as attorneys, when you stand up in front of that jury, they're expecting you to be straightforward with them. And when you make those arguments, I know people are saying, oh, Donald Trump told them not to admit to the affair, and that's important for him to get out. But as the attorney, when they stand up in front of that jury and say things that are against the obvious, that just doesn't make common sense, how can the jury believe their arguments legally? And I think this is a big problem for the defendant because they didn't pass on things that were obvious. They fought everything instead of saying, yes, you're right, he did this, he did that, but he didn't know about the payments. They just denied everything, and I think they shot their credibility. It's going to make it hard for the jury to believe anything that the defendants say.
All right, and Kelly, what did you want to say?
Deny, deny, deny. That has been the MO the whole time, and we look at it, deny, 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 and people hear it enough, then they hope that they believe it.
And Kelly, the prosecution's closing argument, to talk about the prosecution for a second, essentially boiled down to, if you, the jurors, do not find Michael Cohen trustworthy, here's all of this evidence that shows the same thing. And they went through this detailed timeline with all of the evidence they'd introduced in the trial. We're talking about checks, text messages, a lot of detail. What do you make of that particular strategy?
They're telling their story, right? When they do a closing argument, it is not evidence, right? But they're just trying to go back in time and tell the jurors a story. One of the things I found really interesting, the fact is when they're talking about Michael Cohen, they say the prosecutors tell the jury that they did not choose Michael Cohen. We didn't pick him from a witness store, that the defense chose him to be the fixer, and that's why defense picked him. And now the reason why they picked him to do this stuff, to lie, is now they're saying, well, don't believe him because, in fact, that he's a liar. And it was a very strong and compelling argument as they continue to give their closing arguments.
And Adam, in addition to that, the prosecution's attorney seemed to argue Trump liked that Cohen was a liar because Cohen was, quote, willing to lie and cheat on Mr. Trump's behalf. Do you think that was a good way for the prosecution to rebut the defense in a way?
I think there was no great way for the prosecution to try to approach this subject, which is not an elephant. You know, it's a massive elephant, which is that Michael Cohen is a known liar, a convicted liar. And in large part, their case hangs on Michael Cohen being truthful in this instance. So I think that they have to acknowledge it somehow, address it, but try to minimize it and say, this time he's telling the truth. That's a hard challenge. Fortunately for the prosecution, there's plenty of other circumstantial evidence here that gives credit to Michael Cohen's testimony.
And Dante,
that's something they pointed out too. That's something the prosecution pointed out. Our case is not dependent on Michael Cohen. They said that over and over again, and I think they said that because they knew the jury may not believe Michael Cohen's testimony. Now, they also made the point that we're dealing with the people that Trump kept around him. He wasn't surprised that Michael Cohen wasn't an honest person. In fact, that's why he employed Michael Cohen and used him in those situations, because he knew who Michael Cohen was. But they did make it a point to say, even without Michael Cohen's testimony, take away everything he said, if you believe it or not, we still proved enough. We still had enough evidence around that, and without Michael Cohen, that we proved our case. And I think that was their way of hedging their bet, because you can't rely on Michael Cohen to be believable to anybody. So they said, just in case, we have other stuff, and they made sure to point that out.
Yeah. Dante, I want to go back to something you brought up. Sorry, go ahead, Kelly, and then I'll go back to Dante.
Just saying that that's why the documents is so important in this case. That's why the documents are so key in this case, because if you don't believe Michael Cohen, that's fine. But the documents speak for themselves, and the documents help with the timeline.
Dante, I was saying I want to go back to this thing you mentioned earlier when we were in this segment, because I think it's interesting, and I'd like to kind of dissect it a little bit more. When the Trump attorney Todd Blanche got chastised by the judge for that moment, where Todd Blanche, the attorney, said you cannot send somebody to prison, you cannot convict somebody, and the prosecution objected, and the judge sustained that objection, and Blanche said you cannot convict somebody based upon the words of Michael Cohen. Now, the judge later told the jury to ignore that comment, but can you explain how that might be a problem, kind of getting at what you were talking about a little bit earlier?
Of course, we can't ignore the fact that this is a former president of the United States, and this trial is the first of its kind, but this jury understands the magnitude of that as well. If you're sitting on that jury thinking to yourself, if I'm going to find a former president guilty, and now this attorney has put it in there that you could be the person to send a former president to jail. Imagine the burden that's now on them to say, I have to find this person guilty, not beyond a reasonable doubt, but beyond a reasonable doubt, because of all of that pressure. And it was wrong for the defendant to say that. You're not allowed to say that. The jury does not decide penalty. A judge does. The jury just decides if you're guilty or innocent. What the defendant did was, what the defense attorney was, put all of that extra pressure on the jury and said, you better not convict unless you're absolutely positively sure, because you're sending, or you could send, a former president to jail. And I think that burden being put on them, it shouldn't have happened.
All right, everyone stay with us. We're coming back to talk a lot more about all of this. So what are the verdict outcomes that the jury could reach in this trial? Our panel of legal experts is back to break it all down with us. Thanks for sticking around, everybody. We have really 4 potential outcomes to this historic case. I'll just walk through what those 4 are. The jury could decide the prosecution met the burden of proof and find Trump guilty of all 34 counts. That's 1. 2, they could find Trump guilty of only some of the charges. 3, The jury could agree with Trump's defense team, finding him not guilty and acquitting him, or the fourth option, we could see a hung jury where jurors fail to come to a verdict at all. That comes with its own complications. So knowing that those are the four on the table right now, Dante, for scenario one, if Trump is found guilty on all counts, all eyes then turn to the judge, Judge Merchan in this case, on sentencing, and jail time would be on the table, right?
Absolutely. But first, let me just start with this. This is the only country in the world where we have juries as a matter of right. I think it's important because we trust the people in our community to make these decisions, and we don't want people that would all normally hang out together. We want people that are diverse, that's going to have different opinions, that's going to get together and be like, wait, did you hear this? Did you see this? And they're going to chip away at a lot of the nonsense and the BS and come up with what's real and what's right. And jurors generally get it right. They do. I really trust our system, and I like our jury system. Now, in this particular case, if they come up with a guilty verdict, if you look at Michael Cohen, he was the B actor in all of this, and he got jail time. So how can you have a guilty verdict for the main player where he doesn't get jail time? I think it's going to be a problem for Donald Trump's attorneys to go and argue that he should not get jail time when the person who assisted him in this and played a side role got jail time for essentially the same exact crimes and offenses.
Kelly, do you agree?
Well, I think it's interesting when we talk about the fact if he is found guilty of what could possibly the outcome be. I would say that if he is found guilty, I would say that no, I don't believe that he would do jail time because he's a first-time offender. But then if he is, we also have to think about what is the first thing Trump's going to do. He's going to appeal the case. And why is he going to appeal the case? Because he's going to say that the way he was treated was not fair, and because we have to look at the Weinstein case, and in the Weinstein case, the New York court reversed the verdict because Weinstein made the arguments that he did not testify because of questions that he was going to be asked. So if Trump is convicted, I could definitely see him using Weinstein's case saying, I would have testified, but the fact that I was going to be asked these certain questions were harmful to me and they weren't proper questions, and therefore I did not testify.
And Adam, when Donald Trump violated his gag order for the 10th time, Judge Merchan said, the quote was, "The last thing I want to do is put you in jail." New York state law gives Judge Merchan broad authority for sentencing here. He could decide not to incarcerate the former president. What other options could he go to?
He has limited other options, and I think that it is uncommon to have a first-time offender, Class E felony in New York City, frankly, where the jails are very busy. It would be atypical to have jail time. But I think the question you ask is a very good one, which is, what can they do that would actually punish Donald Trump? A small fine, like for the contempt, doesn't go far with Donald Trump. Probation isn't going to be meaningful. Typical conditions of probation would include drug and alcohol testing, would include a prohibition on traveling outside of New York State, and would require employment. But none of those typical conditions make much sense here. So I think that the judge is going to have a hard time when it comes to sentencing, fashioning a sentence that fits both the crime and fits this defendant.
All right, so let's go to scenario 2. If the former president is found guilty just on some counts. Adam, let's just go back to you for a second. If the jury does do that, what does that tell you about how the jury viewed the prosecution's case?
I think that, as Dante said, juries are good and juries typically come to the right conclusion. Juries also sometimes have a way of dividing up the charges and doing kind of a half-half outcome. So it's hard to read too much into if they convict on some counts and acquit on others. It may be as simple as the jury kind of trying to split the outcome.
And Dante, go ahead.
I was going to say it could potentially be the fact that when they look at the checks itself, that they could say, okay, the ones that he signed, we're going to convict him of, but the other ones, we don't feel that we should convict him on the ones that he didn't personally sign.
And that could kind of be the deciding factor there. Dante, you believe that this result would make the success of a Trump appeal even more difficult for his legal team. Why is that?
I do. So a lot of appellate judges, they don't want to, or even a trial judge, they don't want to overturn the will of the jury because they're the deciders of the facts. They're the judges of the facts. And I think a split verdict, what it shows is that the jury was really paying attention, that they really went through every single cause, every single charge, and made sure that things fit and were accurate. And when it didn't, they said not guilty, and when it did, they said guilty. So I think a split verdict to me, whenever I get it, it to me just shows that the jury paid absolute attention to it and didn't just go with a blanket, yes, he did everything, or yes, he did not do anything at all. They really paid attention to each individual one and weighed the facts out. And a lot of judges want to leave that because the jury is, in fact, the judges of the facts. So they want to leave those alone, especially when you have that kind of proof that they put the time and attention into it.
Yeah, and Kelly, I want to ask you now about scenario 3, if he's acquitted on all counts. That would be a giant win for Donald Trump and his legal team, especially considering this is likely going to be the only criminal case he's going to face before Election Day in November, right?
That's never going to happen. Sure, as day turns to night, I do not believe that's going to happen. You're going to have 12 people unanimously, based on the evidence and fact, make a determination that he was not guilty. But yes, anything is possible, right? Kind of like in football, any given Sunday, you have to see what happens. But I highly, highly, highly think it's highly, highly, highly unlikely.
Okay.